Oh, we've been having an interesting exploration these last few weeks, looking at the topics of reincarnation and karma. I'll remind you that first and foremost, overriding this whole topic, or these topics, is the fact that life is eternal. Now, our physical lives in these physical beings doesn't last forever. I'm not sure sometimes if that's good news or bad news. But even when these physical vehicles that we experience Earth in go by the wayside, our souls continue. We are eternal beings. It makes sense if you consider that we were created by that which is eternal and imbued with that same quality. But there's a little fly in the ointment. Even though you and I, on a soul level, were created in absolute perfection and in total complete oneness with the Creator and all of creation, well, we kind of messed things up along the way. We've had negative experiences and thoughts of separation that keep us from knowing in the heart of our hearts the oneness that we were created in. Reincarnation is the whole process where we live successive lives that allow us to energetically and spiritually balance and realign our thinking and our experience. We're restored to a state of oneness in that balancing, in that realignment, through a process called karma. Now, karma to me in my growing up years, coming from a very different faith background, was something vague and mystical. When I got to Unity, I began to understand that karma is really very simply stated as what we call the law of cause and effect. What we put out comes back to us. We hear that all the time around here, don't we? We don't think about it, though, in the big picture. We tend to think about what I put out in the world today comes back to me in the next few weeks or months or years. But it also applies, that same basic spiritual principle, over eons of time. What we put out, what we dish out energetically, comes back to us, for better or worse. It's the energy of our thoughts, our intentions, and our actions that come back to us. They affect our life now and in the big picture. There are two important things to note about about karma in this regard, and we touched on it last week. First of all, karma is not fate or predestination. When we come into this life experience, what we've put out in previous lives is not automatically handed to us to deal with again and again. We alone, by our thoughts, by our actions, by how we handle ourselves, are responsible for this life experience. Also, karma is not about some kind of divine judgment or punishment. It's helpful to understand just how karma is accrued or balanced. And I want to give you a disclaimer at this point. This is how I understand karma now. My understanding of karma and how the whole process works has changed over the last 20 or 30 years as I've danced with it both in this life and from a perspective of the big picture. I'm going to join Charles Fillmore in his statement, "I reserve the right to change my mind as my own spiritual insight deepens." So if you want to take this with a grain of salt, that's just fine. You might have deeper spiritual insights that will lead you to an even more comprehensive understanding of karma as it applies to you. Listen to your heart, and you'll know what you need to know when you need to know it. That said, what we might call negative thoughts and actions produce negative karma, heavy karma. What we will call positive, uplifting thoughts and actions produces positive karma, which of course offsets the negative. So here's an idea of how that works. We're going to put it in the context of a story. You're in your car one day, driving down the road, and through a moment of inattention, your car jumps the curb and you hit a pedestrian. And that pedestrian is immediately dispensed. You've killed them. That'll teach you to text and drive, won't it? What's going on karmically there? And let's take another little angle on that and consider you're driving down the same road and you see a pedestrian there, and gosh darn it, if that isn't that person that last year caused you such incredible pain and suffering, and all of a sudden you're so wrapped up in your feelings of anger and pain and suffering that you take your car and you hit the accelerator and you mow them down. Oh, come on, admit it. Some of you have considered it. So we have a scenario that from the outside looks the same. The car jumps the curb, hits the pedestrian's gone. But there are different facets to the karmic implications of what's happened. In the first instance, as the driver of the car, when you inadvertently dispense with this pedestrian, I would imagine there's some karmic debt involved with that for taking the life of another. In the second instance, when killing the pedestrian was deliberate and malicious, vehicular homicide, well, I've got to believe that there's a lot more serious and intense karmic debt involved with that. So what's the difference? The difference is intention. And that's a significant difference. Intent is our energy, our purpose, the aim of our thoughts and our actions. You see, not only are our thoughts powerful, but the intent behind them is also powerful. If I say kind and loving words to my husband because I really feel kind and loving toward him, that's a very different thing than saying kind and loving words toward my husband in a moment when I'm really not feeling kind and loving toward him. My intention is different, even though it might look the same on the surface. If you do something from compassion and from love, and somehow your effort just doesn't work up and the whole thing blows up in your face, that is a different karmic result than doing something from malicious intent. This is actually a point that's important to keep in mind in our spiritual journey overall. We have to ask ourselves, why? Why do I want to do this? Why do I want to speak this way, think this way, talk this way, behave this way? What is my intention? What is my purpose in how I'm being in the world in this circumstance? Well, there are a couple possible karmic outcomes to our scenario. I've already mentioned the first two. The first one, where the car jumps the curb and dispenses with the pedestrian, there's some karmic debt for ending a life. In the second scenario, where the killing of the pedestrian is deliberate, there's a much heavier karmic debt because it was deliberate and malicious. But there are other karmic insights we can gain from this too, other possible scenarios. What if you're the pedestrian? And where are you at karmically in all of this? Maybe you're a pedestrian that in a previous life, or even earlier in this life, you inadvertently killed someone through folly or misadventure. Then you're being struck by the car and dying in that moment offsets that karmic debt, does it not? So the person who hit you and killed you actually did you a favor in the big picture. Another possible scenario is maybe as the pedestrian, you killed someone either previously in this life or in a previous life with intention. And your dying as a pedestrian helps balance that karmic debt. Well, while the driver of that car actually did you a favor karmically, don't think that the driver's off the hook, because the driver is responsible for their thoughts and intentions. And if they deliberately mowed you down, they still carry a heavier karmic debt from the action, as opposed to the karmic debt you are redeeming as the receiver of that action. Is that making some sense? Can I convolute it any more ways to confuse and amuse you? What I really want to convey is the whole process of karma is complex, and it may not be as it appears to be on the surface. And by the way, we don't necessarily do our karmic work where we incur it. I remember once upon a time in a previous life, well, a previous life in this life to where I am now, being married to someone in a very unhealthy, unhappy relationship. And in leaving that relationship is when I came into spiritual principles and ideas and started to learn about karma. And my immediate thought was, gosh, I must have done something really wicked to him sometime eons ago, because he sure is dishing it out now. It's not necessarily a point-by-point exchange. So if somebody hurts you in this life, don't assume that you've hurt them in a previous life. Just know that somehow in the big picture, divine order is playing out. There's another aspect of karma that we have to talk about, and that is the aspect of grace. The idea of grace very simply says the karmic debt you incur is never as negative as what we've really earned, and the karmic redemption that we may have generated is always more than we technically have earned. Let me give it to you in an example that looks like this. You're in need of funds. You've run up about $9,000 in debt. So you go to the bank and you sit down with the banker and you say, I'd like to borrow $9,000. Banker says, great, we can help you with that. This is the Bank of Grace, we'll do what we can. So the banker comes back with paperwork, and you notice that the loan document that he asks you to sign is for $9,000, which is what you had asked for. But the check the banker hands to you is for $10,000. You say, no, wait, there's a mistake here. I only have $9,000 that I'm asking for, but this check is for 10 grand. And the banker says, yes, but this is the Bank of Grace. We are happy to give you more than what you have asked for. Wow, wouldn't you like to bank there? Well, a month passes and it's time for your first payment. So you gather up $450 because that's your monthly payment on your $9,000 debt for which you were given $10,000. And you go to the bank and you say, here's my first payment. And the banker says, that's great, let me write you a receipt. And they write you a receipt, not for the $450, but for $500. And again, you're confused and say, well, wait a minute, I only paid you $450. And the banker reminds you, this is the Bank of Grace. We give you more credit than you've actually earned. Now let's take this scenario and apply it to a karmic circumstance. And please don't take this literally. These numbers are nothing that is cast in stone. They are figurative only. but they're meant to help us understand grace. If you have, let's say, 10,000 negative karmic debits from this lifetime, from the last lifetime, from whatever lifetimes, and you go to the Bank of Grace, the Bank of Grace might only acknowledge 9,000 karmic debits. That's grace. The negative energy, the negative thoughts, the heavy feelings and actions you've put out don't come back to you at the same level as what you've put out because of grace. And then at this karmic bank of grace, you start amassing and focusing on your spiritual principles so you start living very consciously from love and from compassion and reaching out and offering that to people around you. And you generate, say, 450 light, positive karmic credits. Well, the Bank of Grace will give you 500 credits for that. Under grace, we never completely reap the harvest of our errors, and we always reap more good than we sow. And grace is defined as unmerited divine assistance. It's something we don't earn. It's just given to us, a gift, a pardon, if you will. Do I completely understand it? No. But that too is the nature of grace, a gift freely given in love. Do you give gifts only to people who respond in kind? You give gifts because you love, because you want to give, because you want to reach out to those you care about with something of value. And it's not about what you get back. That's a gift of grace. So what do we do with this grace? Well, we acknowledge it. We appreciate it. We can accept it with humility and gratitude. In fact, grace is yet another way that we can experience and be aware of the benevolence of the universe in which we live. I heard from a few of you this week, after the last couple of Sundays where we've talked about reincarnation and grace and karma, and have a couple interesting questions to entertain that I think you're going to find interesting too. One person asked me, would you judge a series of very serious accidents that happen to the same person over a number of years karma or bad judgment? Think about it. Would you judge a series of very serious accidents that happen to the same person over a number of years karma or bad judgment? If somebody came to me in spiritual counseling with that question about themselves, karma may be a factor in that circumstance, but I would put karma down the list of possible causations. What I would look at first, and what I would invite them to explore within themselves first, is what kind of thoughts or intentions are they putting out in the world? Is there something about them that they feel they need to deserve some kind of punishment through accidents? Or maybe there's something in their belief about themselves where they feel like they don't deserve good. And so they do this self-sabotage that draws accidents into their life. Remember, we are controlled, our life comes from our thoughts. And I would ask this person to look at your thoughts. Look at the thinking that you're putting out into the world. Look at the ideas that you're putting out there. Maybe their idea is simply, I'm accident prone. If they hold that thought in their consciousness day in and day out, I can guarantee you they will be accident prone. And it may or may not have anything to do with any kind of karmic involvement. Remember, karma is not fate or predestination. We are responsible for our thoughts and our actions. The temptation that we have as human beings when we're dealing with a challenge and thinking, oh, well, that's karma, is to abdicate our personal responsibility. Oh, that's karma. There's nothing I can do about it except grin and bear it. That's not a healthy place to be from a spiritual perspective. Whatever's going on in our life, whether the causation is karmic or just inattention and sloppiness, we have, as spiritual seekers, the opportunity to look at our thoughts and what we're putting out into the world, and then seeing if what the universe is reflecting back to us is reflective of our thoughts. If we don't like what we're experiencing in the world, if we're accident prone, the first place to look is at our thoughts and what we're putting out into the world. Do not abdicate personal spiritual responsibility and use karma as an excuse. That will not serve you karmically. Really, it's not possible to know absolutely, at least in my experience. Maybe others further along in the spiritual path have clearer knowledge. It's our job to live every day from spiritual principle and to make sure all of our thoughts and actions are grounded by living with loving intent in the now. Living this way, this life makes this life more fulfilling, even as it helps us resolve whatever karmic debt we may have. Think about it this way. If you're out for a hike, and boy, isn't this spiritual journey quite the hike? If you're out hiking and a rock fall is headed right towards you, does it matter if the rocks are coming from the left or the right? The point is, you are called to respond to the threat appropriately now, if you don't want to get crushed. The most appropriate response to any challenging situation is to use spiritual principle to move through the situation and to learn from it. In fact, there's an Australian Aboriginal proverb that says, "We are but visitors to this time and this place. We're just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, and to love." There was something else about this question that kind of niggled at me as I pondered it. The question again was, would you judge a series of very serious accidents that happened to the same person, karma or bad judgment? And reading that sentence again, the word that jumped out at me was judge. Judgment. It's not for us to judge whether they're our own experiences or certainly the experiences of others. It's our spiritual calling to show compassion regardless of the origin of that individual's accidents. Our compassion blesses both the other person and lightens our karmic load regardless of the causation of the issue. Further, we don't judge ourselves, but rather love ourselves unconditionally and engage spiritual practices conscientiously. Charles Fillmore tells us, the study of reincarnation and karma is not profitable to the student of higher thought. It is not what you have been, but what you are now that is the issue. Our past affects our future, both within this life and across lifetimes. Cause and effect, basic spiritual law. What we need to focus on is what brings us back every day to our spiritual practices, because that does uplift us now and across time. Meditate daily. We're told that deep meditation actually burns heavy karma, and it also connects us with the divine guidance we need to live successfully in this life. Practice self-control. Our thoughts are things, and we as spiritual travelers want to learn to manage our thoughts. And along with that, consider intent. What is the intent behind your thoughts, your words, and your actions? Detach from the siren call of materiality and sensory experience. Not that those things are bad, but if that becomes our whole focus in life, that just pulls us away from the spiritual purpose of being here, and actually karmically ties us to the material world as opposed to the spiritual world. Practice mindfulness. Live in the now. Accuse no one, not even yourself. Live in a way that invites no complaint, and live true to yourself. As we heard in our daily word this morning, forgive. Forgive yourself, forgive others. That frees us now and in the big picture. Seek and surrender to higher will. Surrendering to that higher will enables our soul to expand its consciousness and increase our dominion over ourselves and all matter. And remember, grace. Grace is always in play, a generous gift of the universe to hurry along our karmic fulfillment and our restoration to the perfection and the oneness in which we were created. So now with this deeper understanding, join me once again in our affirmation for the day. Together, grateful for the gift of life I develop spiritually as I faithfully practice spiritual principles. And so it is.